The morning sun filtered through the elegant curtains of the Okafor mansion, casting golden rays across the marble floors that had once echoed with laughter and love. Now, they seemed to absorb the heavy silence that had settled over the house like a suffocating blanket. Emeka Okafor sat in his wheelchair by the window, his strong hands that had once built an empire from nothing, now trembling slightly as they gripped the armrests. 3 years ago, he had been Lagos's most celebrated construction mogul, a man whose very presence commanded respect in boardrooms and whose gentle smile could light up any room. His wife Adiz had been his crown jewel, the beautiful woman who had stood by his side as he climbed from a poor village boy to one of Nigeria's wealthiest men. Those days felt like a distant dream now. "You're pathetic," Adiz's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. She stood in the doorway, her designer dress immaculate, her makeup flawless, but her eyes cold as winter rain. "Look at you, sitting there like a useless burden. Sometimes I wonder why I even bother keeping you alive." Emeka closed his eyes, feeling each word pierce deeper than any physical pain he had endured since the accident. The woman speaking was not the same person who had whispered, "I love you," into his ear on their wedding night 7 years ago. This was someone else entirely, wearing his wife's face like a cruel mask. "Adiz, please," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Not in front of who? The maid? She needs to know what kind of man she's caring for. A broken, worthless shell of what he used to be. From the corner where she was dusting the furniture, Blessing froze. The young woman had been working for the Okafors for only 2 months, but she had witnessed this scene too many times already. Her heart ached as she watched the man who had once been described in newspapers as the gentle giant of Lagos business shrink further into himself with each cruel word. Blessing remembered the stories the neighbors had told her when she first arrived. How Emeka had met Adiz when she was a struggling university student, how he had paid for her education, bought her family a house, and treated her like a queen. How their wedding had been the talk of Lagos, with Emeka declaring in his speech that he would love Adiz in sickness and in health, in wealth and in poverty, until my last breath leaves my body. The accident had changed everything. 3 years ago, Emeka had been rushing home to surprise Adiz for their 4th wedding anniversary when a drunk driver slammed into his car. The impact had crushed his spine, leaving him paralyzed from the waist down. The doctors had been blunt. He would never walk again. At first, Adiz had played the role of the devoted wife perfectly. She had sat by his hospital bed, held his hand during the dark nights when he questioned whether life was worth living, and assured him that their love was stronger than any disability. But as the months passed and the reality of their new life settled in, her mask had begun to slip. "I didn't sign up for this," she had hissed one night, thinking he was asleep. "I married a man, not an invalid." Now, as Blessing watched Adiz circle Emeka's wheelchair like a predator, she felt her hands clench into fists. The woman was relentless in her cruelty, finding new ways each day to remind her husband of his limitations. "You know what the worst part is?" Adiz continued, her voice dripping with venom. "People still ask me how you're doing. They pity me, you know. Poor Adiz, stuck with a cripple for a husband. I have to pretend I'm not embarrassed to be seen with you." Emeka's shoulders shook, and Blessing saw a tear roll down his cheek. She couldn't bear it anymore. "Madam," Blessing said quietly, stepping forward. "Perhaps you should what?" Adiz spun around, her eyes blazing. "Are you telling me how to speak to my own husband in my own house?" "No, madam. I just think." "You think? You're here to clean and care for him, not to think. And let me make something very clear to you, girl." Adiz moved closer to Blessing, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "What happens in this house stays in this house. If I hear that you've been gossiping to anyone, the neighbors, the market women, or God forbid, his family, you'll be out on the street faster than you can blink. Do you understand me?" Blessing nodded, but her jaw was set with determination. She understood more than Adiz realized. Over the following weeks, the abuse escalated. Adiz seemed to take particular pleasure in humiliating Emeka in front of Blessing, as if having a witness somehow amplified her power. She would accidentally knock over his water glass and then berate him for being clumsy. She would invite her friends over and make jokes about his condition, laughing as if his pain were entertainment. But Blessing was watching, and more importantly, she was learning. She discovered that Emeka had been a generous philanthropist before his accident, secretly funding scholarships for underprivileged children and supporting widows in his hometown. She learned that he still tried to manage some of his business affairs from his wheelchair, though Adiz had gradually taken control of most of his assets. And she realized that the gentle, broken man she cared for each day was fighting a battle far greater than his physical limitations. The turning point came on a particularly brutal Tuesday morning. Adiz had invited her mother and sisters for lunch, and she decided to make Emeka the centerpiece of her entertainment. "Look at him," she announced as they sat around the dining table while blessings served them. "My husband, the great Emeka Okafor, can't even feed himself properly anymore. Watch this." She picked up a spoon and began feeding him baby food, despite the fact that his hands worked perfectly fine. "Open wide, my dear husband. There's a good boy." Her relatives laughed uncomfortably, but their eyes showed disgust not at Emeka, but at Adiz's behavior. Emeka sat frozen, his dignity stripped away piece by piece, tears streaming silently down his face. That night, after everyone had left, Blessing found Emeka alone in his room, staring out at the darkness. "Sir," she said softly, "I need to tell you something." Emeka looked up, surprised. In all her months of working there, Blessing had never initiated a conversation with him. "I know your wife threatened me not to talk to anyone about what happens here," Blessing continued, "but I can't stay silent anymore. What she's doing to you, it's not right. You don't deserve this." "She's my wife," Emeka whispered. "In sickness and in health, remember? But marriage is a partnership, sir. It's not supposed to be one person destroying the other." Blessing knelt beside his wheelchair. "I've been watching you, and I see the man you really are. Your wife sees only what you've lost, but I see what remains. Your kindness, your intelligence, your strength. Those things didn't disappear with your ability to walk." For the first time in months, Emeka truly looked at the young woman who had been caring for him. In her eyes, he saw something he had almost forgotten existed. "Respect? What would you have me do?" he asked. Blessing smiled. "I have an idea. But first, you need to remember who you are. You're Emeka Okafor. You built an empire once. You can build yourself back up again." Over the next few weeks, a transformation began. While Adiz was out with her friends or shopping with his money, Blessing helped Emeka reconnect with his business contacts. She assisted him in setting up a computer workstation where he could manage his affairs privately. Most importantly, she helped him document everything. Every cruel word, every humiliation, every abuse. Blessing also did something else. Despite Adiz's threats, she reached out to Emeka's family. His younger brother, Chidi, had been trying to visit for months, but Adiz always had excuses to keep him away. When Blessing called him and described what was happening, Chidi was shocked. "I knew something was wrong," he told Blessing over the phone. "Emeka stopped taking my calls, stopped coming to family gatherings. But I never imagined. We're coming this weekend, whether she likes it or not." The confrontation came on a Saturday afternoon. Adiz had been particularly vicious that morning, forcing Emeka to sit in his soiled clothes for hours while she entertained guests, claiming that changing him would be too much trouble for the help. When Chidi and their parents arrived unannounced, they found Emeka in his current state while Adiz lounged by the pool with her friends. The fury in their eyes was unmistakable. "What have you done to our son?" Emeka's mother demanded, rushing to embrace her eldest child. But the real shock came when Blessing produced the recordings she had been secretly making on her phone. Every cruel word, every humiliation, every moment of abuse. Adiz's face went white as her own voice filled the room, spewing hatred at the man who had once loved her more than life itself. You were recording me?" Adiz stammered. "Someone had to," Blessing replied calmly. Someone had to be his voice when he couldn't find his own. The revelation was devastating. Within hours, Emeka's family had contacted lawyers. Within days, the recordings had been submitted as evidence in divorce proceedings. Adiz's carefully constructed image as the devoted wife crumbled as the truth spread through Lagos society. But the most profound change was in Emeka himself. Surrounded by family who truly loved him, supported by a young woman who had seen his worth when he couldn't see it himself, he began to remember who he was. His business empire, which had been slowly crumbling under Adiz's mismanagement, began to flourish again under his renewed attention. Months later, as Emeka sat in his office, now fully accessible and equipped with everything he needed, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. Adiz had fought the divorce viciously, but the evidence was overwhelming. She had been granted a settlement far smaller than she had expected, and she had disappeared from Lagos society in shame. Blessing knocked on his office door, now wearing the uniform of his personal assistant rather than a maid. "Sir, your 3 o'clock appointment is here," she said with a smile. "Thank you, Blessing. And thank you for everything." She nodded. "You saved yourself, sir. I just reminded you that you were worth saving." As Emeka prepared for his meeting, a negotiation for the largest construction contract of his career, he thought about the woman who had once promised to love him in sickness and in health. Adiz had seen his accident as the end of their story, but in truth, it had been the beginning of his real one. The accident hadn't broken him. Her cruelty hadn't destroyed him. Instead, they had revealed who he truly was. And more importantly, who deserved to stand beside him. Sometimes, he realized, the greatest strength comes not from standing tall, but from learning to rise again when everything seems lost. And sometimes, salvation comes from the most unexpected places, in his case, from a young maid who had the courage to see a man's worth when he had forgotten it himself. The story of Emeka Okafor wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning.